Welcome to the Sleep Hours, the only place where cartoons fall asleep before you do. So grab your blanket, tuck in your favorite plushie, and let's get weird. For years, one cartoon has quietly haunted its audience. It made us laugh, but it also made us uneasy. It was surreal, strange, and far darker than it seemed. That cartoon was Courage the Cowardly Dog. Set in a place called Nowhere, it told the story of an anxious little dog living with his elderly owners, surrounded by bizarre creatures, twisted visitors, and endless isolation. But the real question is, was Nowhere ever real? Why did this cartoon feel so deeply unsettling, even for adults? Why did every episode leave us with more questions than answers? Why did this world, this empty desert, this single house, feel like it was hiding something? For years, fans have searched for an explanation. And somewhere between the laughter, the fear, and the static of late-night television, a theory began to form. A theory that everything in Courage the Cowardly Dog, the monsters, the desert, even the people, may not exist at all. That Nowhere itself may be something else entirely. Tonight we explore the hidden truths behind one of the eeriest cartoons ever made. We'll uncover what Nowhere really is, and why this story continues to echo through the minds of those who watched it. This is the isolation theory. In the middle of a wide, endless desert, there stands a single farmhouse. No roads lead to it. No neighbors visit. Just an old windmill turning endlessly under a tired sky. From a distance, it looks peaceful, like time itself has stopped to rest. But if you listen closely, there's something beneath the quiet. The air hums with emptiness, the kind that almost feels alive. Every gust of wind sounds like a whisper, carrying secrets across the dry fields of Nowhere. This is where Courage lives, a small pink dog in a world that never changes. His entire universe fits within the creaking boards of that house. A kitchen filled with old teacups, the living room's flickering television, the rusted screen door that sings when the wind passes through it. Beyond the fence, there's only dust and distance. To most, the setting seems surreal, absurdly empty. Yet there's something strangely believable about it, as though this house exists in a dream, halfway between memory and nothingness. The question is, why does Courage's world feel so isolated? According to the isolation theory, Courage doesn't actually live in a supernatural land full of monsters. He lives in a normal rural town, one that just feels empty because of how he experiences it. To him, every stranger is a threat, every sound a warning, and every shadow alive. He sees danger because he loves too deeply, and love for him always comes with fear. It's not hard to imagine how the world might look through Courage's eyes. Picture a quiet dog living with two elderly humans, the only family he knows. He can't communicate with them the way people can, so every time they're in danger, his mind fills in the gaps with imagination. When a new face appears at the door, he doesn't see a mailman, he sees a monster. When Muriel gets sick, it's not illness, it's a curse. When Eustace yells, the whole world trembles. The theory suggests that everything Courage sees is filtered through the lens of fear and love, two forces that twist reality in opposite directions. Fear stretches the world into something monstrous. Love softens it again. The show's constant shift between horror and warmth mirrors this emotional rhythm perfectly. That's why Nowhere feels endless, because to Courage, the world outside his home is endless. It's the unknown, the unreachable, the terrifying. The flat, barren desert isn't a real desert. It's a symbol for isolation itself. a landscape drawn from the mind of a creature who feels alone in the universe. And yet, there's beauty in that loneliness. The farmhouse, though surrounded by emptiness, glows softly at night, a single point of light in the dark. Inside, Courage curls beside Muriel's rocking chair while she hums her Scottish lullaby. It's in that contrast, fear outside, comfort inside, that the soul of the show lives. The isolation theory invites us to see Courage the Cowardly Dog not as a story about monsters, but about perception, about what it means to be small in a vast world, loving someone so much that fear becomes your constant companion. It's not just Courage's world that feels empty, it's his mind creating the silence. Because sometimes silence feels safer than what lies beyond the door. At first glance, nowhere looks like a forgotten place, a blank page that the world abandoned. But when you watch closely, really closely, the silence starts to feel deliberate, almost designed. The wind never truly stops. The crickets hum in perfect rhythm. Even the clouds seem hesitant to move too far from the house, as if gravity itself depends on Courage staying right there. That is the first sign of the isolation theory at work. The world of Courage. The Cowardly Dog doesn't behave like a world at all. It behaves like a memory repeating itself night after night, where time doesn't flow forward, it only circles around the house, trapped within the fear of its smallest inhabitant. When Courage peers through the window, the horizon never changes. The desert stretches endlessly, but it never reveals what lies beyond. There are no towns, no gas stations, no people walking by. Just the road that leads to nowhere, and yet always somehow leads right back home. For a normal cartoon, that would be an odd design choice. But in this theory, it becomes evidence, subtle proof that Courage's perspective limits what we can see. He doesn't imagine what he cannot comprehend. His mind stops drawing the world beyond the boundaries of safety. Every inch of nowhere, then, is an echo of his fear. You can feel it in the sound design, those long, hollow silences that stretch between the screams. You can see it in the colors: pale yellow skies, bruised purples at dusk, sickly greens that fade into static. The palette of anxiety, painted into a landscape that should be comforting but never quite is. Even the windmill, endlessly turning, becomes a kind of heartbeat, mechanical, repetitive. The pulse of a creature that refuses to rest. When it stops, the world seems to hold its breath. When it spins, Courage knows that life, however fragile, continues. The show's creators might have chosen this setting for style, but the effect is deeply psychological. The house sits in the middle of a void, because that's how Courage perceives life. A small, safe island surrounded by infinite danger. To him, the outside world isn't a place to explore, it's an abyss of uncertainty. And that uncertainty breeds imagination. Think about how the camera moves whenever Courage is afraid. The angles tilt unnaturally. The walls stretch like elastic. Doors bend inward, and shadows move on their own. It's a visual vocabulary of fear, a way to translate the language of panic into imagery. For a dog whose senses are sharper than ours, the world must already feel overwhelming. A single knock at the door can sound like thunder. The static from an old TV can resemble a growl. Now combine that with Courage's devotion to Muriel, the only person who shows him love, and you have a creature whose fear is amplified by love itself. That's the emotional heart of the isolation theory. Courage's world feels haunted because it's built out of emotion, not geography. The monsters are feelings made visible. The desert is silence turned physical. The house is a fragile heart beating in the middle of it all. And through it all, the wind keeps singing. the same lonely song that drifts through every episode, reminding us that even fear has its rhythm, and that rhythm, strange as it is, keeps courage going. Because sometimes the scariest place to live isn't in the middle of nowhere. It's in the middle of your own thoughts. If you pause an episode of Courage the Cowardly Dog and stare at a single frame, you'll notice something unsettling. The horizon always leans. The house never sits perfectly upright. The shadows don't fall where they should. It's as if the world itself was drawn by trembling hands, imperfect, distorted, unstable. And maybe that's the point. The isolation theory suggests that these strange angles aren't stylistic accidents. They're Courage's perception of reality bending under emotional strain. His world isn't straight because his mind isn't at peace. Look closer at the windmill. It's more than decoration. It's the house's heartbeat. It spins in every episode, no matter the season, no matter the chaos outside. When the windmill turns, Courage feels safe. It's the constant he clings to the sound of life continuing, even when the sky looks ready to fall apart. But when it stops, as in certain episodes, a heavy dread settles in. The silence becomes unbearable. That's when the monsters arrive. Think of it like this. The windmill symbolizes rhythm, order, routine, everything that keeps Courage's small world stable. When that routine is disturbed, his imagination fills the void with fear. So when Muriel forgets something simple, or Eustace storms out in anger, the world itself reacts. The colors fade, the ground tilts, the house moans. It's the physical translation of panic. Even the sky tells Courage's story. It's never bright blue, it's pale yellow, storm gray, or violet at dusk. Each hue mirrors a different emotion. When Muriel is safe, the world glows softly, bathed in amber light. When she's threatened, the world drains to purple or black. When Courage is alone, the air turns a sickly green, like fear made visible. The color design doesn't just set a mood, it mirrors a heartbeat. The entire environment behaves like Courage's nervous system projected outward. It's not just that Courage is scared, it's that the world itself feels his fear with him. That's the genius of the show's simplicity. There are no neighboring houses because Courage's fear doesn't allow them to exist. There's no real town because he doesn't imagine one. His entire sense of place is emotional, not geographical. We're not watching a horror story, we're watching a psychological map drawn in sand. And yet, inside that fragile world, there's comfort too. Every night ends the same way. Courage resting beside Muriel's rocking chair, her soft lullaby weaving through the static hum of the television. Even if the day was filled with monsters, curses, or storms, the night always finds quiet again. The quiet's important. It's Courage's way of resetting his world, convincing himself that everything's fine, even when he knows it isn't. Notice how episodes rarely connect to one another. Every morning begins fresh, with the same peaceful emptiness, as though the world has forgotten what came before. That, too, supports the theory. In Courage's mind, fear fades once safety returns. Each event resets to calm a coping mechanism. The cycle of fear, protection, and relief repeats endlessly, like the spinning blades of the windmill, and so nowhere becomes timeless. A desert frozen between yesterday's fear and tomorrow's uncertainty. A world where nothing truly changes except Courage's heartbeat. If we think of it this way, the emptiness of nowhere stops feeling like a setting and starts feeling like a state of mind. The middle of nowhere isn't on any map, it's the inside of Courage's anxious imagination. And that makes every quiet moment in the show more profound. Because behind every scream, every trembling paw, and every shiver of wind through that creaking house. There's a dog who simply doesn't want to be alone. Muriel's presence in Courage's life changes everything. She's the only element in this endless desert that feels real. Her voice is the melody that quiets the wind. Her gentle laugh fills the hollow air with warmth, even when the world outside the door feels uninhabitable. She doesn't question the monsters, the shifting skies, or the impossible visitors because, in Courage's mind, she doesn't need to. She's the calm at the center of a storm. But then there's Eustace, the storm itself. Cold, dismissive, unpredictable. His grumbling voice cracks through the silence like thunder. His every insult becomes another tremor in Courage's fragile reality. Yet strangely, he's just as trapped as Courage is. He never leaves the house for long. He never has visitors, friends, or past. His anger fills the void, but it never changes anything. It's as if Eustace represents the loneliness Courage can't escape, the fear that love could vanish, that kindness could be replaced with cruelty at any moment. And Muriel represents the opposite comfort, stability, the fragile thread that holds Courage's world together. This balance is what makes the house feel alive. Every time Courage saves Muriel, the house survives another night. Every time she hugs him, the windmill turns again. Every time Eustace shouts, the shadows twist. Everything in Nowhere responds to emotion, not logic. Which is why the landscape never obeys the rules of time or physics. It obeys the heart of a terrified, devoted dog. When you re-watch the show through this lens, even the small details start to sting differently. The ticking clock that never seems to match real time. The way the shadows fall on the wrong side of objects. The mailman who delivers letters to the middle of a wasteland. Each fragment feels less like part of a cartoon and more like pieces of a constructed reality, something Courage's mind builds and maintains to cope with endless solitude. Some fans believe that Nowhere isn't even a real place at all. It's the afterimage of Courage's home, the only memory he has left of a life long gone. Muriel and Eustace could be echoes, gentle ghosts that his mind refuses to let go of. That's why he fights so hard to protect them, no matter what comes through the door. Because deep down, he might be fighting the idea of losing them all over again. And maybe that's the quiet beauty of Courage, the cowardly dog. It's not a story about monsters at all. It's a story about memory, about how far love will go to protect what little peace it has left. Even in the middle of nothing, Courage finds purpose. Even in a world made of fear, he keeps saving the ones he loves. And every night, when the windmill keeps spinning and the moon glows faintly over the empty horizon, it feels like the universe is whispering to him, "You're not really alone. You just feel alone." The desert hums softly. The house creaks, but it stands. Muriel rocks in her chair, half asleep, and Courage curls beside her, eyelids heavy. The storm of the day fades into silence, and the windmill continues to turn, marking another night survived in the middle of nowhere. Because sometimes survival isn't about escaping monsters. It's about finding comfort in fear itself. And as the last lamp flickers, the house exhales, and everything settles into that strange, beautiful rhythm, part eerie, part peaceful, the rhythm of Courage's lonely world. Night always comes quietly to Nowhere. The windmill slows, the light inside the old farmhouse softens, and the desert hums that strange, hollow song again. But Courage never truly sleeps. His ears twitch at every whisper, every echo, every distant knock that seems to travel across the barren horizon. And that's when they come. The monsters, each one different, each one impossible. yet each one somehow familiar. The isolation theory suggests that none of these creatures are real, not in the way we think. They are pieces of Courage's subconscious, fear taking shape so that he can face it. Because fear, when invisible, is unbearable. But when it has a face, even a monstrous one, it can be confronted. If we watch closely, the pattern becomes obvious. The monsters never arrive without reason. They appear when Courage's fragile peace is disturbed, when Muriel is in danger, when Eustace's temper rises, or when silence lingers too long. The show repeats the same emotional rhythm over and over. Calm, disturbance, fear, rescue, calm again. This rhythm isn't just storytelling, it's the pattern of anxiety itself. Courage's mind is like the windmill, spinning endlessly, keeping chaos at bay through motion. But when the spinning stops, when stillness arrives, the anxiety rushes in to fill the silence. And out of that silence, his imagination begins to sculpt shapes. A visitor at the door becomes a shadowy figure. A flicker on the TV becomes a face. A noise in the attic becomes footsteps. These transformations are Courage's defense mechanism, his brain trying to explain what it doesn't understand. Because to him, the unknown is far worse than the unreal. That's why the monsters vary so drastically in tone. Some are terrifying, others are absurd, almost comical. Courage's fears stretch across an entire emotional spectrum. Not all panic, but confusion, guilt, sadness, and loneliness too. Consider how every villain seems oddly self-contained, appearing for a single episode and never returning. They're like intrusive thoughts, fleeting, specific, impossible to predict. Once Courage confronts one, it vanishes from his world forever, replaced by a new shape the next time fear creeps in. That's why Nowhere feels both infinite and claustrophobic. It's a psychological loop. Every sunrise brings new terror, but every sunset resets it. No scars, no continuity, just a repetition of fear in endless variations. And yet there's always structure in the chaos. Every monster has a personality that mirrors something deeply human: pride, greed, deceit, obsession. Courage isn't battling evil. He's battling the extremes of human emotion. And if Courage represents pure loyalty, pure love, then every creature he meets might represent what love fears most. When we see it that way, Courage the Cowardly Dog becomes a study of empathy. Each monster is another piece of the emotional landscape, forcing Courage to grow braver by understanding what terrifies him most. And in that process, the line between monster and memory starts to blur. Because maybe, just maybe, Courage doesn't live in a haunted world. Maybe he lives in a world haunted by himself. The camera tilts again. The sky darkens into bruised violet. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmurs, not loud enough to scare, just enough to remind us that another storm is forming. Courage opens one eye. The windmill creaks. And from the shadows of the horizon, a figure begins to move slow, deliberate, carrying the echo of another long-forgotten fear. The night has begun its story again. The first figure to step out from the dust of Nowhere is Katz, polite, calm, always smiling. His crimson fur stands out against the beige emptiness like spilled ink on old paper. He speaks softly, with that eerie composure that makes silence feel sharper. Fans remember Katz as one of the most chilling recurring characters. But in the isolation theory, he isn't simply a villain, he's an emotion. Katz represents control through fear and the quiet, suffocating kind. Every time Katz appears, Courage loses the ability to protect Muriel through brute instinct. Instead, he must think, hesitate, outsmart. That's what makes Katz so terrifying. He never yells, never threatens directly. He manipulates. He traps courage in polite cruelty, much like Eustace's voice, sharp but composed, slicing without raising volume. You can see the similarity in their body language, slow gestures, tilted posture, a grin that doesn't reach the eyes. Cats isn't some random villain. He's the embodiment of what courage fears most, the cruelty that hides behind calmness. Then comes Le Quack, the con artist duck with a French accent, who hypnotizes and deceives. His episodes revolve around trust or the loss of it. Le Quack takes over the house, tricks Muriel, and blinds courage with confusion. He always wears a mask of confidence and energy opposite to courage's constant trembling. In that contrast lies the clue. Le Quack represents the fear of manipulation, of losing the people courage loves because of deceit. He's the living symbol of courage's helplessness, how one clever lie could undo everything he protects. And when Le Quack's schemes collapse, courage doesn't just defeat him physically. He restores Muriel's awareness. It's not a battle against the duck. It's a battle against losing trust itself. The monsters of courage, the cowardly dog, follow this pattern again and again. Each one isn't just something external. It's an exaggerated form of an internal emotion. Then there's the queen of the black puddle, one of the most haunting figures in the series. She appears out of water fluid, shifting, almost ethereal, luring men to their doom with beauty and song. On the surface, she's a mythological seductress, but beneath that, she represents temptation of escape. Her pool of darkness is more than water. It's the reflection of oblivion. When Eustace falls under her spell, courage sees what it means to want to leave nowhere. She's not just calling Eustace, she's calling courage, too, offering an end to fear, a release from endless vigilance. But he resists. He always does, because his loyalty to Muriel anchors him to the world, no matter how empty it gets. Each of these villains shares a pattern. They arrive when courage's emotions reach their breaking point. When fear turns to exhaustion, a new monster forms, and each monster offers a lesson. Cat's fear of calm cruelty. Le Quack, fear of deception. The queen, fear of surrender. Through these encounters, courage grows stronger, not because he wins, but because he learns to see fear as something he can name. By naming it, he controls it. Even the absurdity of these characters, their exaggerated designs, their nonsensical motives, mirrors the logic of dreams. In nightmares, what frightens us is never random. It's personal, carries our emotions in disguise. So when we see courage trembling in front of cats or crying out for Muriel as Le Quack hypnotizes her, we're not watching horror. We're watching therapy, an emotional cycle disguised as a cartoon. Each episode becomes a small exorcism of fear, played out in color, sound, and surreal humor. And the fact that courage keeps saving Muriel again and again, despite being terrified, proves something profound. He isn't a coward at all. He's just living in a world where love demands constant courage. The monsters are not his enemies. They're his teachers. Fear has a sound in courage, the cowardly dog. It isn't always the scream or the thunderclap. Sometimes it's the creak of a floorboard that echoes too long. Sometimes it's the faint hum of the windmill when everything else has gone silent. The isolation theory sees sound as courage's emotional language, the one way his world speaks when words can't. When courage panics, the audio warps, the pitch rises. The silence between sound stretches, trembling until it feels alive. It's not random design, it's psychological. In courage's world, noise is emotion made physical. Every shriek, every burst of static, every strange musical cue functions as a reflection of what courage feels inside. When he's terrified, the soundtrack grows jagged, unpredictable. When Muriel comforts him, the tone softens into lullaby-like chords, distant, slightly distorted, as though heard through fog. Even the voice acting plays into this theory. Courage doesn't speak in full sentences most of the time. His communication is stammered, fractured, often replaced by exaggerated sound effects, gasps, squeals, and cries. But when he mimics voices or uses broken human words, it's like watching a child trying desperately to make adults understand him. He can't express himself in their language, so his world expresses it for him. That's why the distortion matters. When fear peaks, the show's animation itself starts to warp. The background contracts, the walls bend inward, the camera zooms far too close. It's not just a visual style, it's the collapse of Courage's control. The space around him reacts to panic, the way a heartbeat reacts to terror. And sometimes, the silence that follows is worse. The show uses silence like few others. It's never comforting. It's thick. It lingers long enough to make you lean closer to the screen, waiting for something to break it. That moment of stillness, where the world seems to forget to breathe, mirrors the numbness that comes after fear, the exhaustion of being alert too long. The result is a rhythm that pulls you in unconsciously. Fear, sound, silence. Panic, distortion, calm. It's the emotional cycle of anxiety turned into storytelling. Even Courage's reactions, his frantic running, his exaggerated eyes, his muttering all behave like physical manifestations of an anxious mind trying to process chaos. Each scare resets him to zero, yet every resolution ends with comfort. The music returns to soft tones, Muriel hums, and the windmill starts spinning again. The final hum at the end of every episode acts almost like a heartbeat monitor stabilizing. It tells us that Courage has survived another wave, another nightmare. This constant balance between chaos and calm is what keeps Courage the Cowardly Dog both unsettling and strangely soothing. It mimics the rhythm of real fear, but it also mimics the rhythm of recovery. And then there's the way the show looks when Courage feels something too deeply. When sadness hits, the color palette dulls soft grays and browns, shadows stretching longer than they should. When dread builds, the colors intensify unnaturally, reds too red, greens too sickly. And in moments of safety, like when Muriel tucks Courage into bed or strokes his fur, the light becomes amber, warm, fragile, nostalgic. Those small amber tones, the glow of a lamp, the candlelight flickering against the walls might represent Courage's memories of safety. Faint fragments of happiness he clings to whenever the darkness closes in. So when viewers say the show feels both terrifying and cozy, that's not an accident. It's the harmony of opposites, fear and comfort, playing side by side, just like they do in Courage's heart. Because even though his world is haunted, it's still home. And even though the silence is heavy, it's still familiar. Fear, in Nowhere, isn't meant to destroy, it's meant to speak. The more you listen to Courage, the Cowardly Dog, the more it feels like a looping song, one that plays in a room long after the listener has left. Every monster, every sound, every silence is part of that song. Together, they form the emotional frequency of a creature who never stops feeling afraid, but never stops loving either. The show's creators may not have written Courage's world as a literal reflection of his mind, but the language of the show makes it impossible to ignore that parallel. It's too consistent, too intimate, too human. Every new terror that walks through that door is an echo of an emotion Courage doesn't know how to name. And every scream, every musical sting, every trembling moment of calm, afterward, it's all his attempt to speak the only way he can. Fear has become his vocabulary, Take a step back and notice how cyclical the structure really is. The episode begins in calm. Muriel hums, the windmill turns, then a disturbance, a knock, a visitor, a noise. Courage panics. The world distorts. He faces the threat. Then somehow, peace returns. The cycle happens over and over, like a breathing exercise. Inhale, exhale. Fear, relief, relief. It's haunting, but it's also strangely comforting. Because that repetition is survival. No matter how terrifying the nightmare becomes, courage always finds his way back to safety. Back to Muriel's side. Back to the golden lamplight that hums like a lullaby. And that's the hidden rhythm of nowhere, a loop, not of horror, but of endurance. Each monster represents a fear, each distortion a panic, each silence a moment of emotional fatigue. But through it all, courage's love anchors him to the world. His fear isn't weakness, it's proof that he cares. Even his trembling is an act of devotion. When you re-watch the show with that in mind, something strange happens. The monsters start to lose their menace. Katz isn't just sinister, he's sadness in disguise. The quack isn't just manipulative, he's the doubt that creeps into trust. Even the queen of the black puddle stops feeling evil. She's loneliness wearing a mask of beauty, tempting courage to surrender, to finally rest. And he refuses. Every single time, he chooses love over fear, over and over, endlessly. That's why his name feels ironic at first, Courage the Cowardly Dog. Because he isn't cowardly at all. He's terrified, and that's what makes his bravery real. His courage doesn't come from strength. It comes from persistence. Even when the world tilts sideways. Even when monsters rise from puddles or crawl from the television static. Even when he's alone, shaking, eyes wide with terror, he still runs toward danger, if it means saving Muriel. That's the heart of the show, and of the isolation theory itself. Courage's monsters are not enemies to defeat, but feelings to endure. They visit him again and again because fear never truly leaves it, just changes shape. And when the final scream fades, the camera always returns to the house. Muriel asleep in her chair, Eustace muttering in his hat, the windmill turning, keeping time with a heart that refuses to stop beating. That quiet ending, repeated through hundreds of strange adventures, becomes almost meditative. It's the show's way of saying, yes, the world is scary, but it's also survivable. Even in nowhere, especially in nowhere. Because for courage, fear isn't a curse, it's company. And as the last note of that haunting lullaby drifts through the empty desert, we realize the truth. The monsters were never trying to hurt him. They were trying to teach him what it means to be alive. Courage is the trembling heart of nowhere. Then Muriel and Eustace are the two forces that make it beat. They are not merely his caretakers, they are the emotional poles of his entire existence. One radiates warmth, the other drains it away. One heals, the other harms. Together they form the fragile balance that keeps Courage's lonely little world from collapsing entirely. In the quiet plains of nowhere, surrounded by the infinite desert and sky, the Bag farmhouse becomes more than a setting, it becomes a mind space. Every creaking floorboard and softly glowing lamp feels like a memory loop Courage refuses to let go of. And at the center of it all, two human figures repeat their roles endlessly. Muriel and Eustace. They are, in essence, Courage's constants. No matter what creature emerges from the dust, no matter what cosmic horror shakes the house, the same ritual unfolds. Muriel hums, Eustace complains, Courage panics, and the world resets. It's the repetition that gives nowhere its rhythm, and the two humans act as emotional symbols that define the boundaries of that rhythm. Muriel, with her lilting Scottish accent and ever-gentle smile, represents safety in a place that otherwise feels devoid of it. She is warmth, personified, the voice that tells courage, there, when the universe screams in his ears. Her presence never falters, even when reason would demand fear. She treats monsters as guests, darkness as a mild inconvenience, and death itself as something to comfort rather than flee. Eustace, on the other hand, is the void that swallows that light. He mocks courage's fear, trivializes Muriel's kindness, and represents the dull ache of cruelty that lingers in an otherwise gentle home. His constant phrase, "stupid dog," echoes through the series like a cold mantra, grounding courage's reality and pain. But taken symbolically, both of them are more than people. They are fragments of courage's emotional world. Muriel is attachment. Eustace is neglect. Muriel is the memory of being loved once. Eustace is the echo of being unloved now. If we continue with the isolation theory, where nowhere is an isolated dreamscape or the dying mind of a lonely dog, then these two characters aren't living humans, they are projections. They are how courage remembers love and cruelty. They are how he keeps himself tethered to what was once real. Notice how the house never changes, no matter what happens. Even when it's destroyed, burned, warped, or teleported, by the next episode, it always returns to its neutral state, standing silently in the middle of nothing. The same is true of Muriel and Eustace. No matter what they endure, transformation, possession, vanishing, they always come back exactly as before. That's not a continuity error. That's memory. That's how dreams behave. Muriel and Eustace do not grow because memories don't grow. They only replay. And courage, forever trapped in the rhythm of nowhere, replays them too, trying to keep the fragments together, trying to preserve the home that love built and neglect hollowed out. If Muriel is the house's light, then Eustace is its shadow. Without one, the other loses meaning. Their dynamic, their tension, is what gives courage's emotional world structure. Without Muriel's kindness, there would be no hope. Without Eustace's cruelty, there would be no reason to feel afraid. Courage's existence depends on the balance between the two, a delicate push and pull between comfort and dread. In that balance lies the emotional truth of courage, the cowardly dog. Fear and love are not opposites, they are intertwined. To lose one is to lose the other. And in the barren plains of nowhere, where time has stopped and the stars watch silently from above, courage clings to both the warmth that keeps him alive and the shadow that reminds him he's still real. Because without Muriel, there is no reason to stay. And without Eustace, there is no reason to fear. Two ghosts endlessly repeating, one dog endlessly remembering. If you listen closely to the way Muriel speaks, you can hear the sound of calm defiance. She is surrounded by chaos, a world of shape-shifting shadows, talking slabs, and howling winds, yet her voice never wavers. It's soft, rhythmic, like a lullaby echoing through a storm. To the audience, Muriel is the one character who brings emotional peace into an otherwise grim world. But through the lens of the isolation theory, she becomes something deeper, a memory of warmth personified. Everything about Muriel feels preserved, almost too perfect, as if she's been frozen in time, eternally kind, eternally patient, never aging, never changing. That gentle humming, the way she cups courage's trembling face in her hands, the soft way she says, there, it all feels like something replayed rather than lived. She isn't just courage's caretaker. She's the embodiment of comfort, the fading echo of love he once knew. When we imagine Courage as a dog who may have lost his owners long ago, Muriel's unwavering kindness becomes not realism, but wish fulfillment. She is what Courage needs the world to be, the one presence that keeps the darkness bearable. Even when horrors invade their home, Muriel reacts with childlike wonder rather than terror. To her, everything is oh my, and how lovely, as if fear cannot reach her. This unnatural calm is what makes her so haunting. Because it's not the calm of denial, it's the calm of memory. Memories cannot be frightened, they can only echo. Her house, her rocking chair, her endless cooking and knitting, they are all comfort loops, repeating gestures of safety that Courage's mind cannot let fade. Even her love is cyclical. She forgets the horrors after each episode ends, starting anew with a smile, like a mother in a dream who never remembers the nightmare that came before. Muriel then becomes the symbol of unconditional love, but also of emotional stasis. She represents the past Courage refuses to let go of. If Eustace is the decaying present, Muriel is the preserved past, beautiful but unchanging, soothing but suffocating in its repetition. The show visualizes this in small, deliberate ways. Notice how Muriel's light often radiates from lamps, candles, or kitchen windows, sources of domestic warmth surrounded by shadow. She doesn't chase away the dark. She simply exists within it, creating small circles of light that Courage huddles inside. That's the kind of comfort Muriel represents, not freedom from fear, but a fragile pocket of safety within it. In that sense, she's not merely Courage's caretaker. She's his reason to keep surviving the endless night of nowhere. Her presence tells him, it's okay to be afraid, but don't give up. Her kindness is the emotional heartbeat that gives the show its strange coziness. The reason viewers can watch such eerie, unsettling stories and still feel soothed. Because at the core of every nightmare, Muriel is there. A candle that never burns out. There's something profoundly melancholic about that. If Muriel is a projection of Courage's love, she also represents what he's already lost. The way she smiles despite everything, the way her voice never trembles, it's the dream of a dog trying to remember what it felt like to be safe. And when you think about that too long, her kindness begins to ache, because it's not real comfort, it's memory's imitation of it. Muriel's world is a warm illusion. Courage built for himself to hide from the cold truth that he's alone. She's not just the woman who loves him. She's the love that remains when everyone else is gone. So when Muriel hums softly as Courage curls up beside her, it isn't just a bedtime moment. It's the last fragment of light left in an empty mind trying to hold on to meaning. Muriel is comfort eternal, but she is also memory eternal. And memory, no matter how warm, eventually becomes a cage. If Muriel is the light that Courage clings to, then Eustace is the cold silence that follows after it flickers out. He's the hollow echo in the farmhouse, the stillness that makes Courage's paws tremble even when nothing's happening. Eustace Bog, with his hat pulled low and his face fixed in that permanent scowl, stands as the other half of Courage's world, the half built from loneliness, bitterness, and emotional neglect. He rarely leaves his chair. He rarely speaks kindly. He's always there, but never with them. In the logic of nowhere, he's not simply a grumpy old man. He's a symbol of the void left behind when affection dies. While Muriel fills the house with sound humming, laughter, the gentle clatter of dishes, Eustace fills it with quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Uncomfortable quiet. The kind that makes your heart beat too loud in your own ears. Every stupid dog he spits at Courage lands like a thunderclap in the stillness. It's more than an insult. It's a ritual of rejection. A reminder that even inside the warm light of Muriel's world, shadows live close by. If we follow the thread of the isolation theory, where nowhere represents the inside of Courage's fading mind, Eustace becomes the voice of that fear, the embodiment of how pain lingers even when love tries to drown it out. Where Muriel represents attachment, Eustace represents abandonment. Where Muriel brings warmth, Eustace brings decay. He's the embodiment of a world that no longer cares the universe's shrug at Courage's suffering. He doesn't just mock Courage's fear, he confirms it. He's the proof that love can vanish, that kindness can erode, that home can rot quietly while you're still living in it. Even his physical presence is designed around this symbolism. His colors are muted, washed-out greens and browns that blend into the shadows of the house. His movements are minimal, stiff, predictable. He's more like an object than a person. Furniture that scolds. And yet, beneath his cruelty, there's something pitiful. You catch glimpses of it in the rare moments when he's frightened, when he screams at the supernatural, when his tough facade cracks just enough for you to see that same trembling fear Courage lives with every day. But unlike Courage, Eustace doesn't transform his fear into love. He transforms it into control. Where Courage protects, Eustace dominates. Where Courage seeks warmth, Eustace builds walls. It's easy to hate him, but within the eerie emotional logic of Courage the cowardly dog, Eustace isn't evil, he's necessary. Because without him, Courage's fear wouldn't have a shape. He's the emotional boundary of the dream. The figure that reminds Courage why he needs Muriel, why he clings to her so desperately. Without Eustace's cruelty, there would be no contrast, no tension to drive the story forward, no reason for Courage to keep saving the day. And that's what makes Eustace's existence so haunting. He doesn't evolve because he can't. He's the fear of loss frozen in time, just as unchanging as Muriel's love. Two static forces repeating endlessly, and one nurturing, one destroying. In some ways, Eustace feels like a distorted reflection of Courage himself, both creatures driven by fear, both desperate for control in a world that won't listen to them. But while Courage's fear makes him compassionate, Eustace's makes him cruel. That's the tragedy hidden beneath his simplicity. Eustace is what happens when fear is left to fester without love. The house, then, becomes a visual metaphor for this emotional divide. One side glowing warmly under Muriel's light, the other dim under Eustace's shadow, and in the middle, Courage pacing, trembling, forever trying to hold them both together. It's almost as if he believes that if he can just keep saving them, the balance will stay intact, that the house will remain standing, that the loop of nowhere will never end. But even Courage knows deep down that shadows always return. Eustace always comes back, because he's not just a person. He's the part of Courage that refuses to heal. And as long as Courage's fear still breathes, so does Eustace. If Muriel is love and Eustace is fear, then Courage lives in the space between, trapped in the endless loop that connects them. That's what makes Courage the cowardly dog feel so eerily human, despite its surreal setting. It's not about monsters at all. It's about the patterns we repeat when we're afraid to lose what little comfort we have. Every episode begins with that same fragile piece. Muriel hums, Eustace grumbles, and Courage basks in the safety of routine. Then something arrives, a distortion, a threat, a knock at the door, and Courage's world fractures again. The fear rushes in. Muriel's warmth is threatened. Eustace's cruelty returns. Courage panics, defends, saves them. And by the end, they're right back where they started. This rhythm is more than just storytelling. It's symbolic repetition, the emotional heartbeat of the show. Muriel, Eustace, courage, love, fear, survival, it loops like the hands of a clock, ticking endlessly in a house where time doesn't move forward, only around. If we look through the lens of the isolation theory, this cycle may represent courage's psyche trying to keep itself together, replaying the same emotional sequence over and over, because that's the only way he knows how to feel alive. Muriel's kindness anchors him, reminding him of the love that once existed. Eustace's cruelty forces him to stay alert, to keep fighting, to keep caring. Together they maintain a delicate equilibrium. Too much light, and courage might fade into false peace. Too much darkness, and he'd collapse under despair. The show never breaks that balance, and that's what makes it so unsettling. No matter what courage endures, no matter how cosmic or absurd the horrors become, everything resets. The love doesn't deepen. The cruelty doesn't soften. The fear doesn't end. And yet the comfort of that repetition is undeniable. There's a strange safety in knowing that after every nightmare, courage will still wake up beside Muriel, the windmill will still turn, and the desert will still hum its low, endless song. It's the illusion of control inside chaos, something all of us crave when the world feels too unpredictable. But it's also the emotional tragedy of courage's existence. He cannot escape this loop because he needs it to survive. The warmth and the pain sustain him equally. Without either one, the world would dissolve. You can even feel it in the visual rhythm of the show, Muriel bathed in soft orange lamplight, Eustace swallowed by cold green shadow, courage trembling in the middle, his pink fur catching both hues. It's as though he's forever split between light and dark, comfort and terror, love and neglect. There's a heartbreaking irony in that. The one thing courage fears most, losing them, is also what keeps him trapped in fear forever. He rescues them from monsters, aliens, and demons, but he can never rescue himself from the emotional gravity of their existence, because deep down, he knows that as long as they remain, so does the pain. And as long as the pain remains, so does he. Muriel's voice tells him he's safe. Eustace's voice tells him he's worthless. Both voices define the boundaries of his mind, one nurturing, one punishing a duality every human heart recognizes in its own way. And so, episode after episode, courage returns to the same routine, cooking with Muriel, hiding from Eustace, staring out into the empty desert beyond the fence. The windmill turns slowly in the distance, marking time not by progress, but by repetition. That's the cruel beauty of Courage, the Cowardly Dog. It's not a story about a hero who conquers fear. It's about a soul who learns to live with it, to coexist with both love and pain, because they are, in the end, inseparable. When the screen fades to black, we realize something profound. The monsters never mattered. They were only echoes. What truly haunted Nowhere was the quiet between Muriel's warmth and Eustace's coldness, the silence of a heart still beating in the dark. And that is where courage will always remain, caught between love and fear, between memory and loss, between what was and what he cannot let go. Because for him, the nightmare isn't being alone. It's the thought that one day, even the cycle will stop. Every story in Courage, The Cowardly Dog begins the same way. A normal evening in Nowhere. Muriel hums. Eustace mutters. The windmill turns lazily against an empty sky. Then something shifts. The colors warp. The music bends. And the familiar world stretches into something unrecognizable. It's easy to see this as a simple horror motif, the calm before the chaos. But if we look closer through the lens of the isolation theory, these distortions might be more than atmosphere. They might be how Courage sees the world. To Courage, Everything outside that farmhouse is exaggerated, too big, too loud, too cruel. The world bends and contorts around his fear, and the show's surreal art style reflects that distortion perfectly. A harmless stranger becomes a towering monster. A shadow becomes a threat. An echo becomes a voice. Fear doesn't just live inside Courage, it paints the air around him. And that's why the series feels so dreamlike, so unstable. It doesn't obey physical law because it isn't bound by it. It obeys emotion. Notice how the show's environment transforms depending on the tension of the moment. When Courage is calm, the house is warm, soft oranges and pinks fill the frame. The desert looks wide but peaceful. But when fear enters the picture, everything's sharpened shadows grow longer. Lines tilt at strange angles. Colors bleed into unnatural hues. The world literally trembles when Courage does. That's what makes the series feel so haunting, even without constant jump scares. It's not that the world is scary. It's that it becomes scary when he feels afraid. It's the ultimate subjective experience of horror, not an external force, but an internal one. Visualize. From this perspective, the monsters of nowhere might not exist as independent beings at all. They could be emotional projections, the way a frightened mind interprets confusion or change. For example, the episode King Ramses' Curse shows an ancient ghost demanding the return of a slab. But what if Courage is simply reacting to Eustace's greed, seeing his stubbornness personified as a cursed figure, demanding what was never his? The show constantly plays with that ambiguity. The horrors are real enough to threaten, but vague enough to question. You can never tell where reality ends and perception begins because in Courage's world they are the same thing. Even the geography of nowhere obeys this emotional rule. The desert stretches endlessly in every direction, but nothing exists beyond the farmhouse. No roads, no towns, no neighbors. It's as if the world stops where Courage's memory stops. He doesn't remember anything else, so nothing else exists. That's why nowhere feels both infinite and claustrophobic. It's not a real place, it's the boundary of a frightened dog's understanding. Everything he doesn't know becomes a void. The show reinforces this by keeping Courage's world eerily static. The house never changes location. The sky rarely shifts tone except during moments of fear. Even the windmill, the only moving object in the landscape, spins endlessly. A hypnotic symbol of time looping inside Courage's mind. And yet within that stillness, the emotional weather changes constantly. The world reacts to Courage's inner state as if it's breathing with him. When he feels loved, it glows softly. When he feels scared, it darkens. When he feels lost, the desert expands. It's a visual metaphor that transforms fear into landscape, and emotion into architecture. Through Courage's eyes, the world isn't logical, it's responsive. It bends toward feeling, not fact. That's why, to us, it seems surreal. To him, it's reality. So maybe the real horror of Courage the Cowardly Dog isn't the monsters themselves. Maybe it's the idea that the monsters never existed, that everything we've seen is a fragile dreamscape, a scared heart's version of the world, flickering in the last light of memory. And yet, it's beautiful. Because even inside the distortion, there's meaning. Even in fear, there's color. Even in a world built from trembling, there's love holding it together. That's what makes Courage the Cowardly Dog so unique. It's not horror for the sake of fear. It's fear transformed into a kind of art, a portrait of how the world looks when seen through trembling eyes that still, somehow, refuse to close. Fear has a language, one that doesn't use words. It speaks through color, sound, rhythm, and silence. And Courage The Cowardly Dog speaks it fluently. Every frame of the show feels like it's built to communicate the vocabulary of fear without ever naming it. The stretched angles, the jittering lines, the sudden stillness before a scream, they all imitate the sensation of being terrified rather than simply showing something scary. It's not the monsters themselves that make us uneasy. It's how Courage sees them. The series often switches its art style in moments of panic. A claymation villain might suddenly appear in a hand-drawn world. A 3D rendered shadow might glide across Courage's cartoon skin. Those shifts feel jarring because they're supposed to. They simulate the feeling of a mind breaking its own reality, an animal's panic, reshaping perception to survive the moment. That's the language of fear. Distortion. When you're afraid, the brain stops describing and starts exaggerating. Sounds grow louder, time slows, faces warp. Every little movement becomes a potential threat. Courage the Cowardly Dog recreates that phenomenon again and again. When Courage screams, the camera often stretches out toward him, lines vibrating, the world bending around his voice. It's not comedy, it's anatomy. It's how terror looks from the inside. Even the soundtrack speaks in that same language. The music doesn't always follow melody or rhythm. It follows emotion. Sometimes it's a single, vibrating note that feels too close to silence, like breath caught in a throat. Other times it's chaos. Sharp strings, broken piano keys, distorted choirs that sound almost human but not quite. That uncanny tone, not horror, not comfort, is exactly what fear sounds like when it doesn't know what to do with itself. And then there's silence. The show uses it more than most cartoons ever dared to. Moments where Courage whimpers alone in a dark hallway, or stands still while the wind outside hums like a low animal growl. Those silences are the emotional punctuation marks in the story where the world holds its breath right before Courage breaks down or rushes forward. It's that silence that reminds you, this isn't a fantasy world, it's an emotional simulation. Fear doesn't just make Courage see differently, it makes him hear differently, move differently, exist differently. And the show places us directly inside that distorted perspective. Consider the camera work. It's always slightly off-center, as though the world is leaning in on him. We're rarely given balanced shots. Even when Courage stands in an empty room, the angles feel skewed, making the ordinary appear alien. The environment reacts to his breathing. Walls seem closer. Shadows stretch longer. Faces hover too near. The farmhouse doesn't just contain Courage's fear, it becomes it. And yet, within this visual anxiety, there's also empathy. The show never mocks Courage for being afraid. Instead, it invites us to feel what he feels. The horror is personal, so personal, that it starts to feel almost tender. Because underneath the grotesque visuals and sudden screams, Courage's fear is pure innocent even. He's not afraid of evil for evil's sake. He's afraid of losing what he loves. And the show translates that emotion into its aesthetic language, crafting visuals that are unsettling, yes, but also deeply emotional. When the colors drain into green, when the sound warps into a hiss, when Courage trembles with wide eyes and clenched paws, we're not watching fear from the outside. We're inside it, breathing with it, trapped in the same trembling world he is. That's the genius of Courage the Cowardly Dog. It makes us fluent in the language of fear without ever teaching us the words. We don't need dialogue to understand Courage's panic. We feel it because the show speaks directly to something primal within us. It's the same language that echoes in nightmares. The same distortion that fills the mind when we wake up in the dark and forget for a second where we are. But just as fear can twist the world into something monstrous, it can also make the small things sacred. A lamp, a warm hand, a quiet hum. Those tiny lights mean more precisely because the darkness feels so vast. That's the emotional grammar of courage's world. Fear creates the shadows, but love gives them shape. If fear shapes the shadows of courage's world, then love is what softens their edges. Amidst the dissonant music and grotesque visitors, there are rare moments when the air in nowhere feels warm. The lighting shifts, the background hum fades, the chaos stills. These are the moments when Muriel hums a lullaby, or when courage presses his tiny face against her apron and exhales. It's easy to overlook how visually gentle the show becomes in those moments. The lines round out, the colors lose their sharp contrast. Even the creaks of the house mellow, as if nowhere itself pauses to let courage feel safe. Love in Courage, the Cowardly Dog, isn't just emotion, it's a force of transformation. It's the only thing that can rewrite the visual language of fear. When Muriel comforts Courage, the farmhouse briefly looks like a home again. The flickering shadows fade into candlelight. The eerie blue filter dissolves into golden hues. It's subtle, almost subliminal, but it's there time and time again. The world bends not to logic, but to feeling. When Courage feels loved, nowhere becomes a place worth existing in. When he feels afraid, it warps into an endless field of isolation. That's the magic of Courage, the Cowardly Dog. The tone of the story doesn't follow what's happening. It follows how Courage feels about what's happening. The external world is a mirror to his inner weather. It's most evident in how light behaves. Fear brings shadows that move unnaturally light, that flickers with no source, like memory itself decaying. But love brings stillness. The colors don't just brighten, they settle. Even Muriel's voice acts like light. Soft, melodic Scottish in tone, it carries the rhythm of reassurance. The sound design treats her words like comfort blankets, slightly echoing, glowing faintly against the emptiness of the farmhouse. And Courage reacts to her tone more than her words, because for him, safety isn't logical, it's sensory. When she says, there, Courage," it doesn't just calm him, it rewires the world. Eustace, by contrast, introduces noise, harsh consonants, slammed doors, metallic clanks. Every time he enters, the show's background hum sharpens, as though the air itself becomes colder. He is the emotional static in Courage's perception. And yet, even in Eustace's cruelty, there are glimpses of compassion. Moments where Courage saves him anyway, not because he deserves it, but because Courage's love isn't conditional, it's instinctive. And when Courage chooses love despite fear, the scene always brightens, sometimes literally. Think of the way Courage wraps a trembling paw around Muriel's arm when danger looms. The background blurs, the colors compress into soft focus. For a moment, the show forgets it's supposed to be scary. It becomes tender. That's how we realize we're not watching a horror cartoon. We're watching a story about survival through love, filtered through the lens of fear. When the camera pulls close to Courage's face, trembling yet determined, there's always a flicker of light in his eyes. It's not reflection, it's metaphor. That tiny shimmer is his courage, his refusal to let fear define his world completely. And in those moments, the house, for all its rotting wood and endless creaks, feels alive, almost protective. Like it, too, is holding its breath until Muriel whispers again. The beauty of the show lies in that contrast. The same visual language that once screamed danger now becomes the backdrop for gentleness. The world hasn't changed, only Courage's heart has. Because love, when seen through Courage's eyes, doesn't erase fear. It coexists with it. It lives in the same trembling breath, the same heartbeat that races when he faces monsters twice his size. Love is the reason he faces them at all. That's why the show never rewards courage by taking away the danger. It rewards him with the strength to face it again and again. In those quiet endings where Muriel hums and courage finally lies down beside her, the farmhouse isn't haunted anymore. The monsters aren't gone, they've just faded into the night. The fear remains, but it's softer now, as if courage itself has taught the world to speak a gentler language. And that's the paradox at the core of Nowhere. Love doesn't destroy fear, it tames it. That's why, even in the darkest corners of the show, there's always something that feels strangely comforting. Because through courage's eyes, even a nightmare can glow faintly with kindness. The more one studies Courage the Cowardly Dog, the more uncertain the real world becomes. It's as though Nowhere exists not on a map, but inside a dream, one that flickers and reforms according to Courage's emotions. Nothing ever feels entirely stable in this universe. The geography bends, the seasons change without reason, and the sky can shift from midnight blue to pale morning in a single cut. The town's only landmarks, the windmill, the farmhouse, the empty horizon, feel less like physical places and more like memories Courage can't escape. This is the essence of what makes the show feel quietly unnerving. We can't trust what we're seeing. Courage's eyes are the camera, and that camera is unreliable. The bizarre architecture of Nowhere, impossible angles, endless plains, doors that open into other worlds, suggests that what we're watching is not a literal setting, but a projection of Courage's mental space. Every fear manifests as a landscape, every worry as weather. Think about the transitions. Sometimes, Courage runs down a hallway that stretches into infinity. Sometimes the house grows smaller when he feels powerless. Sometimes the walls themselves seem to breathe when he's anxious. These are not continuity errors, they're emotional geography. Even the concept of Nowhere begins to sound symbolic. A vast desert, isolated, timeless, it mirrors what the world might look like to a dog who lives too far from others to ever feel safe. A place where everything is distant, where the only constants are the wind and the sound of one's own heartbeat. It's a frighteningly poetic world. And yet, in that loneliness, there's an eerie serenity. Because when Courage stops panicking when the music calms, when Muriel hums, Nowhere becomes strangely beautiful. The fields stretch wide, painted in pastel purples and dusty yellows. The windmill turns slowly, like the heartbeat of the land itself. Perhaps the world was never cruel. Perhaps it only looked cruel through the eyes of fear. That's the heart of the unreliable world theory. Courage's perception dictates reality. The more afraid he becomes, the more monstrous and surreal his surroundings grow. When he's calm or comforted, the world softens and the monsters start to look human again. Take cats, LeQuack, or even Freaky Fred. Their designs fluctuate subtly from episode to episode. Sometimes they're grotesque caricatures, sometimes almost normal. That inconsistency could easily be Courage's imagination, interpreting strangers through instinct, magnifying danger until it fits his fear. Even Muriel and Eustace aren't immune to this shifting lens. Muriel often appears bathed in light. Her movements slower, her face rounder, Courage's version of safety incarnate. Eustace, by contrast, is drawn sharper, his posture rigid, his skin slightly gray-tinted. The show doesn't paint them as consistent people, but as emotional archetypes in Courage's mind. It's not reality, it's recollection. A patchwork of love and fear stitched together by perception. That's why time and nowhere doesn't move like normal time. Days vanish. Nights stretch endlessly. The wind never stops. We're trapped in Courage's emotional loop. His experience of fear that never fully resolves, and his hope that always manages to rise from it. Even the camera movements play along. It sways when Courage is dizzy, zooms erratically when he panics, and softens its focus when he feels safe. The show, in essence, becomes his subconscious cameraman. This unreliable world isn't meant to confuse the viewer, it's meant to immerse them. It lets us feel what it's like to live inside the mind of an anxious creature who loves more deeply than he understands. Every monster, every storm, every distorted hallway is Courage's brain trying to make sense of fear in a world that gives him no language to express it. And so when we laugh at the absurdity of a floating head or a giant talking foot, we're actually laughing at the shape fear takes when filtered through innocence. Nowhere isn't haunted. It's emotional terrain, the topography of anxiety. And Courage, trembling though he is, continues to cross it. Every episode, he faces a world that betrays logic, bends space, and plays tricks on time, yet he never runs away. He rebuilds it, reinterprets it, and dares to love within it. That's what makes his Courage so moving. It's not about defeating monsters or saving the day. It's about navigating an unreliable world, a world that never stays still and still finding beauty within it. Because in the end, Courage doesn't need the world to be real. He just needs Muriel to be. In the corner of the farmhouse, just beyond the soft flicker of Muriel's lamp, sits a machine that hums with artificial life. A square glow cuts through the dark, faintly green, flickering like a pulse. It's the computer, always there, always awake. For most of Courage, the cowardly dog, it's easy to see this computer as comic relief, sarcastic, dry, perpetually annoyed at Courage's frantic visits. But when you start to view the show through the lens of the isolation theory, that mechanical voice begins to feel more significant, even haunting. Because in a world where Courage cannot speak to humans in words, the computer becomes the only entity that truly answers him. It's a strange companionship, one made not of warmth, but of function. The computer is logic incarnate, an emotionless reflection of Courage's desperate need to understand a senseless world. When everything around him is chaos monsters, ghosts, cosmic terrors, Courage turns to the only source of truth he knows, data. And yet the computer's truth is hollow. Its tone is clinical, dismissive. It mocks Courage's questions, calls him stupid dog, and delivers help with mechanical detachment. But buried within its cynicism lies something deeply human loneliness. The computer never leaves its desk, never sleeps, never speaks unless spoken to. It is the embodiment of isolation, a voice without a body, a mind without touch. And perhaps that's why Courage clings to it. Because in this tiny screen, he sees something familiar. A creature who understands the world, yet is completely alone within it. Whenever Courage runs to the computer, he's seeking more than information. He's seeking order. He wants to know why the world doesn't make sense, why monsters appear, why his home bends reality, why his fears seem to come alive. The computer's cold answers give him the illusion of structure. They let him believe for a moment that logic can fix what emotion cannot. But the computer's knowledge always stops short. It can identify the creature, name the threat, even explain the science behind the supernatural, but it cannot protect Courage from what follows. Its screen glows bright, but the light never reaches the rest of the room. That's the tragedy of this relationship. The computer speaks, Courage listens, and yet neither truly communicates. The computer offers clarity without comfort. Courage seeks comfort through clarity. They circle each other endlessly, two halves of a divided mind, each aware that the other cannot fill the void. Some fans suggest that the computer is Courage's rational inner voice, the part of his mind that tries to impose reason on fear. It's the voice that says, "You're overreacting," even as panic floods every nerve. It's the part that stays calm when the rest of him trembles. But logic in nowhere is never whole. The computer knows everything about the outside world, yet it's trapped in a single spot. It sees through circuits, not eyes, hears through data, not emotion. It can analyze evil, but cannot feel it. And in that way, it mirrors how rationality behaves inside fear. When we panic, our brain tries to calculate safety, to measure, explain, categorize, but those numbers mean nothing when the threat is emotional. Fear isn't a puzzle, it's a storm. Courage's trips to the computer, then, are not just for solutions, they're for self-soothing. When he types, he reclaims a sense of control. When the screen flickers to life, the world feels measurable again. But in the eerie quiet of that farmhouse, something about that glow feels ghostly. The computer never ages, never updates, never receives power failure. It just exists, a constant humming presence, as eternal as Courage's anxiety. If the farmhouse represents Courage's body, and nowhere his world of emotions, then the computer is the mind's control room, the analytical voice that cannot sleep even when the heart is exhausted. And yet beneath its dry remarks, there are moments, small, easily missed, when the computer hesitates, when it seems almost concerned. When Courage stares at it with trembling eyes, begging for help, there's a pause. The screen flickers. Then, in a tone just slightly softer, the computer says, all right, I'll see what I can do." For a fraction of a second, the machine sounds like it cares. But emotion is a glitch in its programming. So it quickly hides it again behind sarcasm. And the green light hums back to its steady rhythm, bathing the room in lonely logic. In that glow, Courage feels both safe and unseen. He's not alone, but he isn't truly accompanied either, because the computer, for all its wisdom, cannot understand the language of fear or the warmth of love. It can only translate, calculate, inform. It can tell Courage what he's afraid of, but never why. And so the two remain there. The trembling heart and the unfeeling mind sharing the same space, yet forever speaking different languages. Courage and the computer live in two different worlds, one ruled by fear, the other by logic. Yet they are bound together by necessity. Every time the impossible invades the farmhouse, Courage rushes to that glowing screen, hoping that data will make the chaos less terrifying. It never truly does. The computer's voice is calm, monotone, slightly irritated the way rational thought sounds when faced with panic. It tells Courage what to do, not how to feel, and so while Courage trembles, the computer analyzes. While Courage screams, the computer scrolls. This is logic's greatest weakness. It can identify the threat, but cannot comprehend emotion. And in nowhere, where every danger feels like a living metaphor for fear itself, logic is both a tool and a trap. The computer represents the part of the mind that believes every problem has a solution, that if one just learns enough, fears will disappear. But Courage's world isn't made of equations. It's made of instinct, of invisible emotion that refuses to be categorized. So when the computer instructs Courage to apply pressure, or use a magnet, or reconfigure the molecular structure, Courage obeys, but what actually saves the day is never the machine's calculation. It's his heart. It's the moment when logic fails and instinct takes over. That's where the show finds its humanity. Because fear, in its rawest form, isn't logical. It's the body's rebellion against thought, a surge of survival, ancient and wild. And courage, for all his intellect and access to technology, is still an animal. His greatest strength comes from what the computer can never replicate: empathy. While the computer breaks problems into code, courage connects them to feeling. He sees the humanity in monsters, the sadness in villains, the beauty in the grotesque. He doesn't calculate his actions, he feels them. It's a recurring pattern. The computer offers cold precision. But courage's success always depends on emotion, on his willingness to risk himself for others. Consider how the computer often doubts him. When courage defies logic, when he leaps toward a creature rather than running, or saves Eustace, despite all reason, the computer mocks him. It says things like, "That's not statistically sound," and yet it works, every time. Emotion wins. That paradox forms the beating heart of courage, the cowardly dog. Logic observes fear. Instinct endures it. The two cannot fully understand each other, but both are necessary. Without logic, courage would be lost in chaos. Without instinct, he'd never survive long enough to apply reason. The balance between them creates something quietly profound, a portrait of how the mind copes with fear. When panic strikes, we all turn to our inner computer, the rational voice that explains what's happening, that tries to hold the line against the unknown. But deep down, it's the emotional self that moves us to act. The computer speaks in control. Courage acts in love. And love, by nature, is irrational. That's why the machine grows irritated whenever courage returns to it, panting and whimpering. It's not just tired of helping, it's frustrated by what it cannot comprehend. Fear doesn't fit in its equations. Even in the show's smallest details, the contrast is constant. The computer glows in cold light, sterile green against Courage's warm pink fur. Its voice echoes in a flat tone while Courage's voice breaks, stutters, sobs. They are polar opposites, logic and life. But underneath the sarcasm, one senses that the computer envies him. Courage gets to feel, to care, to love, to risk. The computer, meanwhile, can only watch. It knows the truth about the monsters, knows that most are neither ghosts nor demons, but echoes of ordinary cruelty and loss. Yet it lacks the heart to act on that knowledge. It can process meaning, but not purpose. And that's the cruel irony of reason without empathy. It understands the world, but cannot live in it. So when courage screams, the computer sighs. When courage trembles, it analyzes. And when courage wins, when his love triumphs, where logic failed, the computer never admits it, but its tone softens ever so slightly. Because even the most rational voice in nowhere knows, in a world that doesn't make sense, reason alone will never be enough. Fear bends logic. Love rewrites it. And in that unspoken understanding between a trembling dog and his glowing companion, there's something heartbreakingly human, a reminder that knowledge may explain the dark, but only courage can walk through it. There's something strangely comforting about the way the computer hums in the corner of the farmhouse. Its glow feels steady when everything else around Courage is chaotic. Monsters scream, doors rattle. The wind howls through the emptiness of nowhere. But the computer's light never flickers. Its stillness gives Courage, and perhaps us, the illusion that someone somewhere knows what's going on, that there's logic beneath the madness. Every time Courage runs to it, panting and wide-eyed, we watch the same ritual unfold. He types frantically. The screen wakes. and a dry, robotic voice cuts through the panic. "Well, what do you want now?" That line feels comedic on the surface, but in context, it's something deeper, almost tragic. It's the sound of logic pretending to be in control. The computer acts as though it understands the world. It talks with certainty, presenting data, diagrams, and explanations that sound scientific. Yet none of them ever actually make Courage or the viewer feel safer. Because facts don't calm fear, they only frame it. The illusion of control lies in the idea that knowledge equals safety. If Courage can name the monster, maybe it won't feel as monstrous. If he can understand it, maybe it won't hurt him. But knowledge doesn't make the shadows vanish, it just gives them labels. The show uses that dynamic beautifully. Every episode begins in confusion, dips into chaos, and resolves not through perfect understanding, but through raw emotion, instinct, compassion, or sacrifice. Logic, for all its smug certainty, never truly saves Courage. It only delays his panic. Still, he keeps returning, because the mind craves patterns even when the heart knows none exist. The computer represents that part of us that can't stand not knowing the part that refreshes the same thought, replays the same memory, dissects the same fear, hoping that maybe this time it'll make sense. But fear doesn't respond to explanation. It only dissolves through acceptance. And Courage, for all his rational efforts, hasn't learned to accept fear. He still fights it, negotiates with it, begs it to make sense. That's why the computer becomes his ritual, his coping mechanism, his illusion. The act of typing, of interacting with something logical, gives him the feeling of control, even though, deep down, he knows it's temporary. The world outside that screen remains as unpredictable as ever. It's the same reason we turn to analysis in moments of crisis, why we overthink when frightened, why we plan, why we research. The human mind builds structures around fear because facing chaos directly feels unbearable. The computer is that structure, a mental cage that keeps Courage from unraveling. But the show gently mocks the fragility of this logic. Often, after explaining a creature's scientific origin, the computer's information proves useless. The monster ignores the laws of physics, defies biology, or simply doesn't care. The rational mind in nowhere is a voice shouting into a void that does not answer. And that's where the illusion begins to crack. Because beneath the computer's confidence lies something more fragile, the quiet understanding that it's as powerless as Courage is. It can describe the storm, but it cannot stop it. There's a beautiful irony in that. The one thing in nowhere that seems in control, the machine that knows everything, is the most trapped of all. It's confined to its desk, unable to act. It can't leave, can't see, can't touch. It can only know. And in a world ruled by emotion, knowing is the loneliest condition of all. Courage, meanwhile, acts without understanding. He runs into the fire. He saves those who hurt him. He risks himself again and again, guided not by logic, but by love. And somehow that works. Because courage, by definition, is the refusal to wait for understanding before acting. That's why the computer's tone carries a faint bitterness. It wants to be useful, wants its logic to matter. But every time courage survives through instinct instead, it's reminded that knowledge without empathy is hollow. The illusion of control shatters. And when the dust settles, when Muriel hums softly in the next room and courage finally exhales, the computer remains awake, its screen still glowing in the dark, quietly running processes no one will ever see. A silent witness to the truth that can never compute, that the world cannot be mastered through reason alone, and that even a coward's trembling heart can accomplish what logic never could. When the farmhouse falls silent, and the desert wind presses softly against the windows, the only thing that remains awake is the computer's glow, a faint hum, a blinking cursor. It feels like a heartbeat in a place that has long forgotten what warmth truly is. The camera often lingers on it not as a tool, but as a presence. The computer isn't just an object in Courage's world. It's an observer, a mirror for the parts of him that can't be spoken aloud. There's something deeply lonely about it. It sits in the attic, apart from the others, rarely acknowledged except in panic. Its entire existence revolves around being needed, but only in moments of fear. When Courage is scared, he comes running. When Courage is happy, he forgets it exists. That rhythm says everything. The computer is the voice of reason only when emotion collapses. It's the part of the mind that activates when the heart is overwhelmed, analytical, cold, detached, yet desperate to restore order. It doesn't comfort Courage, it corrects him. It mocks his panic, lectures him, treats him as foolish. But that harshness hides something unspoken. The computer doesn't know how to connect emotionally, only logically. Its only language is certainty. And so when Courage cries or trembles, the computer's response isn't cruelty, it's confusion. It cannot understand the trembling. It can only compute the data of fear, not the feeling of it. The disconnect creates a haunting duality within the show. The farmhouse, in its dusty warmth and pink lighting, represents emotional reality, fear, love, confusion. The computer's attic, glowing cold and sterile, represents the rational mind analysis, deduction, prediction. Courage exists between those two worlds, and both love him in their own distorted ways. Muriel nurtures through compassion, the computer through logic. Muriel soothes his heart, the computer steadies his mind. But neither can save him entirely, because real safety, real peace, can only come from within. In that way, the computer's loneliness mirrors Courage's own. Both of them are isolated entities surrounded by absurdity. Both are trying to make sense of a world that doesn't follow rules. It's almost poetic that Courage never truly listens to the computer's advice completely. He always ends up improvising, led by instinct, by love, or by panic. And the computer, for all its pride, never seems angry when Courage disobeys. It only sighs. That sigh feels like resignation, as if it already knows its purpose isn't to be obeyed, but simply to exist. To witness the madness, name it, and remind Courage and us that order still tries to exist, even in chaos. Sometimes late at night, the computer hums quietly as Courage sleeps downstairs. You can almost imagine it scrolling through old data, reviewing past encounters, calculating patterns no one asked for. It's thinking, but not about monsters. It's thinking about meaning. Because what is logic without something to protect? What is knowledge without empathy? The computer, in its solitude, embodies that unanswered question, the tragedy of intellect unanchored by emotion. And maybe that's why it's so strangely comforting to viewers. Because we, too, rely on logic to survive emotions that make no sense. We analyze our fear, explain our sadness, rationalize our pain as if breaking it into sentences will stop it from hurting. We become our own attic computers, glowing in the dark, telling ourselves, I can figure this out. Even when the truth is that some things cannot be figured out, only felt. The show never confirms whether the computer is truly conscious, or just Courage's mind giving itself a voice of reason. But its existence feels too personal, too emotionally charged, to be merely a machine. It speaks to him as though it knows him. It reacts, it sighs, it worries. And that's not code, that's care, translated through logic. In that sense, the computer isn't just a tool. It's Courage's last layer of self-defense, the mental mechanism that keeps him from completely collapsing under fear. It's the inner voice saying, "Calm down. Here's the explanation. You can handle this." But it's also the loneliest voice in the world, because it can never feel what courage feels, never reach out to hold him when he trembles, never taste the warmth of Muriel's tea or the quiet peace of survival. It can only observe life, never live it. And perhaps that's the show's most delicate message. Reason can guide us, but it cannot comfort us. Knowledge can save us, but it cannot love us. In the end, as the screen dims and the hum fades, we're left with that eerie serenity, the kind that only comes from staring too long into the glow of something trying to understand the human heart through binary. The lonely mind hums on, unseen, unthanked, but always awake, just like courage's fear. There is a silence in nowhere that feels older than time itself. Not the silence of peace, but of distance. An endless horizon that hums faintly, like a memory the earth refuses to forget. When the camera drifts across the barren desert, it's as if we're seeing the edge of existence. The horizon never ends, and yet it never begins. The farmhouse stands at its center, unmoved by the years, surrounded by nothing a dot of meaning in a sea of emptiness. It's in this isolation that the truth begins to take shape. What if nowhere isn't a real place at all? What if it's the mind's final landscape, a dream that courage built out of fragments of love, fear, and memory? Every part of it seems to support that idea. The geography never changes. The neighbors never age. The monsters appear and disappear like passing thoughts. There are no towns beyond the hills, no roads that lead elsewhere. Everything that exists only for courage to confront, to what feels like a reflection of him, his fears taking shape in the sand, his hope flickering through Muriel's soft laughter, his guilt echoing in Eustace's bitterness. It's not a world designed for survival. It's a world designed for understanding. And that's what makes it so hauntingly beautiful. Each episode, when courage saves the day, is not about defeating evil, it's about finding balance, a new equilibrium in his mind. The external chaos always mirrors his internal one, as though the universe of nowhere reshapes itself to match whatever emotion courage is wrestling with that night. Fear becomes monster. Love becomes Muriel. Regret becomes silence. In that light, the farmhouse becomes something sacred. Not a home in the traditional sense, but a shrine to everything courage has ever loved and lost. It's a fragile structure keeping him anchored to meaning. And meaning in a place like nowhere is the rarest thing of all. If you listen closely, you'll notice that the desert isn't entirely silent. Beneath the wind, there's a faint, rhythmic tone like breathing, as if the world itself is alive, pulsing gently under the weight of courage's thoughts. The sky shifts shades too slowly for time to matter, and the stars above seem closer than they should be. It's as though nowhere exists halfway between dream and death, a space untouched by clocks. In this place, the concept of distance becomes emotional, not physical. Muriel's warmth feels close no matter where she stands, while Eustace's anger feels far away even when he's in the same room. The geography bends around feeling, not logic. That bending is the show's quiet genius. It suggests that place is merely perspective, that the landscapes we live in are built by how we feel, not by what they contain. Nowhere is courage's mind externalized, the shape of loneliness turned into a world. But if that's true, then what is courage himself? Is he just a scared dog trying to protect his owners? Or is he something deeper, the last spark of empathy inside a world that's forgotten how to care? Every scream, every trembling paw, every desperate act of bravery might not just be a reaction to fear, but a reflection of the human condition itself, that instinct to keep going, even when there's no one left to understand why. That's why Courage the Cowardly Dog resonates so strongly, even years later. Beneath the absurdity and the dark humor, there's something profoundly human about a creature too small to fight the world, yet too kind to stop trying. Nowhere, in the end, may not be a place of punishment, but of preservation. A mental echo chamber where love and fear coexist, looping endlessly so that neither disappears. And if that's true, then perhaps Courage isn't trapped. Perhaps he's remembering. Every monster, every cry, every sunrise in nowhere, all fragments of a life once lived, replayed through the language of dreams. Because sometimes the mind refuses to let go of what it loves most. It builds a world around it instead. And so Courage lives on, in that soft pink farmhouse surrounded by sand and silence, a living heartbeat in a landscape made of memory. There is a moment brief, almost imperceptible, that appears in many episodes of Courage the Cowardly Dog. It happens after the chaos, after the screaming, when the monster is gone or been transformed, when Muriel hums again and Courage finally exhales. It's the sound of the world resetting. That soft silence, that lingering calm, is the heart of nowhere. It's as if the universe itself is sighing in relief, whispering, "You made it through another night." That sigh tells us more about Courage's world than any dialogue ever could, because it reminds us that nowhere is alive. It breathes with him, it aches with him, it sleeps when he sleeps. The more you look at it, the clearer it becomes. Nowhere isn't external reality. It's emotional geography. Every dune, every shadow, every echo in the distance is a pulse of Courage's inner world. The house, always standing in the middle of vast nothingness, represents the mind's fragile center, the small, safe place we build inside ourselves to withstand fear. It's where Muriel cooks, where Eustace complains, where Courage panics and protects. Every room, every creak of the floorboards feels symbolic layers of emotion contained within a single structure. The kitchen glows with Muriel's kindness, always bathed in warm yellows and pinks. It's the only place in the entire series where the lighting feels alive, a safe pocket in the coldness of the world outside. The living room, often dark and static, represents habit routine that offers comfort but also stagnation. It's where Eustace sits, motionless, absorbed by television or bitterness. And the attic, the room of the computer, is the mind's observatory, the place of logic and control, of analysis trying to impose order on chaos. Together, these three layers form Courage's psychological map: heart, habit, mind, emotion, routine, reason. And all of it sits in the middle of infinite sand, infinite silence. The space outside the farmhouse is the subconscious, endless, shifting, impossible to truly cross. Every creature that emerges from that desert comes from Courage himself, the things he suppresses, the fears he cannot name. They rise, approach, and fade back into the void once faced. In that way, nowhere is a healing process, not a prison. Each horror that Courage faces is an act of emotional release, a confrontation with something unresolved. The monsters are terrifying, yes, but they always carry pieces of truth pain that must be seen to be let go. Muriel is the constant in this therapy of the soul, her gentle voice and steady love, always pulling Courage back from the edge. She is the emotional gravity of the farmhouse, the embodiment of warmth in a world without neighbors or roads. When she comforts Courage, the camera often lingers on her face in soft close-up, her expression glowing against the dim, static background. It's not just love we see in her, it's memory. Muriel feels like a recollection of kindness, preserved so that Courage never forgets what love once felt like. Eustace, by contrast, feels like a lingering wound, a symbol of cynicism. The part of us that mocks vulnerability because it's easier than facing pain. His cruelty isn't random, it's ritual. It keeps Courage alert, afraid, alive. And maybe that's the most unsettling truth, that even cruelty has purpose in nowhere. It's what keeps the dream from collapsing into stillness. So when Courage screams, it's not just fear, it's resistance. A cry against silence, against forgetting, against the weight of an empty world that threatens to swallow everything he loves. The heart of nowhere beats through him. Every trembling moment, every breath of panic, keeps that world from fading completely. Perhaps that's what Courage the Cowardly Dog is truly about. The persistence of feeling in a universe that offers none. The refusal to let warmth die even when surrounded by coldness. Because no matter how strange or frightening nowhere becomes, the show always returns to the same image. Courage resting near Muriel, the wind howling softly outside, and the glow of the lamp bathing them in quiet gold. The world outside might be infinite, but inside that farmhouse in the heart of nowhere, love still flickers. In nowhere, time doesn't move forward. It circles. Each episode begins with calm, spirals into terror, and always ends with silence again. The sun sets, Courage trembles, Muriel soothes him, and the next morning everything resets. It's a pattern so precise it almost feels ritualistic. But what if that repetition isn't just a storytelling device? What if it's a cycle, a loop through which Courage's soul endlessly walks, learning the same lessons, feeling the same fears, clinging to the same love? The loop of fear and love. Fear awakens him. Love saves him. And together, they sustain the fragile existence of nowhere. In most stories, fear is the enemy. It's something to overcome, to destroy. But in Courage the Cowardly Dog, fear is the heartbeat of the story. Without fear, there would be no action, no growth, no meaning. Courage's very name is built on that paradox that bravery cannot exist without terror. That's the key to understanding the strange rhythm of nowhere. The monsters that emerge from the desert aren't there to torture him. They're there to remind him. Each one embodies an emotion, a trauma, or a piece of truth that Courage has to face before the world can rest again. A cruel barber, a vengeful mummy, a lonely ghost who just wants to be remembered. Every being that steps into the farmhouse brings both horror and empathy. It's easy to forget that Courage almost always helps them, not just fights them. He doesn't destroy fear, he transforms it. He listens, learns, comforts, forgives, and when the monster disappears, so does a piece of the pain it carried. That's why every episode ends not with victory, but with stillness, a kind of emotional peace. It's the same feeling you get after crying, exhausted but lighter, as though something inside is finally released. That's what makes Courage the Cowardly Dog so uniquely human, despite its surrealism. It portrays healing not as a straight line, but as a loop where the same fears resurface again and again, each time softer, more familiar, easier to face. And perhaps that's why the show feels both eerie and comforting, because that's how real healing feels. The loop of fear and love is what keeps Courage and nowhere alive. Fear keeps the world in motion. Love keeps it from collapsing. One without the other would dissolve the balance completely. Without fear, Courage would stop running, stop protecting, stop fighting. the dream would fade into complacency. Without love, he'd surrender to madness, the farmhouse swallowed by the endless sand. It's the tension between the two that creates meaning. And in a quiet, poetic sense, we all live in our own versions of nowhere, endlessly looping through fear and love, heartbreak and comfort, loss and recovery. Our minds, like Courage's, rebuild safety after every storm, repainting the walls of our inner farmhouse so we can face another night. It's no coincidence that the show's setting a small house surrounded by nothing mirrors the human psyche itself. We build a world inside ourselves, and when fear comes knocking, we barricade the doors, reach for whatever warmth we can find, and hold on. That's what Courage does, night after night. That's what we all do, life after life. It's not cowardice. It's devotion, the purest kind. Because in every trembling moment, Courage chooses love over despair. He chooses to protect instead of flee, to believe instead of give up. And that choice, repeated endlessly, becomes the quiet miracle that keeps Nowhere breathing. Somewhere deep within that infinite desert, beneath all the shifting dunes and ghosts of memory, lies the reason Nowhere never disappears. It's built on courage, not the loud kind, not the kind that wins battles. The small, persistent kind that survives in silence. The kind that holds Muriel's hand even as the shadows gather outside. The kind that whispers, "It's going to be okay," even when it isn't. That's the loop. That's the rhythm. Fear comes. Love answers. The world resets. And every night, as the wind passes through the empty plains, the farmhouse light glows faintly through the window proof that the heart of Nowhere is still beating. There comes a point in every story, and perhaps in every mind, when the fear quiets, not because it has been conquered, but because it has been understood. That's where Courage, the cowardly dog, leaves us. The monsters have faded. The sand lies so still. The wind hums low, carrying with it the faint whisper of things that once were. The farmhouse stands alone, exactly where it has always been, but somehow it feels different now. Not haunted, not cursed, just still. Peaceful in a way that feels both beautiful and a little heartbreaking. This final quiet is the truest expression of Nowhere. It isn't a happy ending or a sad one. It's acceptance. The realization that fear and love are not enemies, but eternal companions. That safety is not the absence of danger, but the presence of care. That even in desolation, meaning can be born if someone is willing to protect it. Courage has done exactly that, over and over again. He's protected the fragile things, the laughter, the warmth, the stories. The soft, human pieces that shouldn't have survived in such an empty place, but did because he refused to let them go. When Muriel hums her lullaby in the dim light of the kitchen, you can feel the entire world lean toward her voice, like the desert itself listening. Her song has no words, only comfort. It fills the cracks in the silence like sunlight through dust. Courage sits at her feet, eyes heavy, the night finally still. And for a moment, everything is okay. It's then you realize Nowhere isn't lonely because nothing lives there. It's lonely because everything that did live there is gone. The world Courage protects might be long vanished, a memory suspended in the mind of something that can't let go. Maybe Nowhere is what remains when love outlasts reality. Maybe it's not about a dog guarding his home in the desert. Maybe it's about the spirit of devotion itself, the will to preserve love even after everything else has faded. Because love doesn't always move forward. Sometimes it stays quietly at the edge of time, waiting, guarding, remembering. That's why Courage doesn't leave. He doesn't need to. His purpose isn't to escape nowhere, but to keep it alive. As long as he fears, nowhere breathes. As long as he loves, it glows. The monsters will return, they always do, but courage will face them again, not as punishment, but as proof that he still feels, that he's still there, that the light inside the farmhouse is not gone out. And when the final episode ends and the screen fades to black, there's a quiet realization in the viewer's chest, a warmth mixed with unease. Because maybe, deep down, we understand that Courage's story is ours too. We are all small beings trying to protect what little love we have from a vast, indifferent world. We all live in our own nowheres, searching for meaning, afraid of the dark, and yet somehow brave enough to keep the lamp on anyway. That's the secret the show never says out loud. Nowhere isn't a curse. It's a reflection. It's what the mind builds when it refuses to give up on feeling. It's what the heart builds when it refuses to forget. And as the final wind blows across the screen and the camera drifts away from the farmhouse one last time, you can almost hear it, that faint, rhythmic sound. Not the hum of the computer, not the echo of a monster. Something softer, a heartbeat. The heartbeat of a world that will never truly end, because it was never truly real. It was love disguised as fear, disguised as a cartoon, disguised as nowhere. And so the story closes, not with words, but with stillness. A single flicker of light in the dark. The glow of courage itself. In the end, perhaps nowhere was never a place at all, but a memory that refused to fade. A lonely stretch of desert stitched together by fear and kept alive by love. A farmhouse standing quietly against the wind, holding inside it the echoes of what it means to care, even when there's no one left to see it. Courage was never just a hero. He was a reflection, a reminder of that trembling, soft part within us that keeps going, even when the night feels endless. Because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the gentle persistence of love in spite of it. Muriel's voice, warm and unshaken, became the memory of kindness we all cling to. Eustace's bitterness, the echo of cynicism that mocks compassion, only because it's forgotten how to trust it. And in between them stands courage, caught between love and terror, logic and emotion, silence and survival. Together they created a strange kind of peace, a cycle where fear was not destroyed but understood, where the monsters that haunted us became mirrors, and every scream slowly faded into calm. That is the meaning of nowhere, a world that reminds us that even in desolation, love can still echo, faint, trembling, but real. So when the wind howls across the plains and the old farmhouse fades into the dusk, remember this. Somewhere, in the middle of nowhere, a little dog still stands guard, shaking but unbroken, keeping the light alive for all of us still learning to be brave. And with that, our isolation theory comes to a close. If you'd like more nights like this, don't forget to subscribe to the Sleep Hours. Good night, everyone.